Frogs. Frogs are cool little creatures, right? They like to hop around and do all kinds of adorable and wacky little things, like catch bugs, swim, and make this little noise for absolutely no particular reason at all. So that's cool, but have you ever sat down and thought to yourself, hey, what if this frog could speak? What goes on in this frog's mind on a day-to-day basis? Does he go to frog school or college? Does he have family? Does he have a wife and 11 kids at home with a mortgage and a car payment? Does him and his frog wife have arguments about the custody over the kids? Does he have $100,000 in student loan debt that he still hasn't paid off yet? There's so many questions that could be asked about this creature, but we'll never know because, you know, frogs can't speak. But what if I told you there was this show? A show where not only the frogs spoke, but the frogs also created a complex functioning society with lore so deep that it expands out to different dimensions, time zones, space, and beyond. Well, that show is none other than, I'm gonna be 100% completely butt naked honest with you guys right now. Before even starting the show, I was spoiled so fucking hard. I was spoiled so hard, it's not even funny. I'm usually the type of person to stay away from Twitter and trends about certain topics and shows, but this one was literally following me wherever I went. So when watching the first few episodes that were very episodic in nature, I was sitting there thinking to myself, yo, when the fuck do these guys turn Super Saiyan? The journey of Amphibia begins with a seemingly normal girl with insanely skinny arms named Boonchuys, who one day is sucked into a magical chest box, eventually being transported into a wacky world where the frogs and other amphibians are sentient. And immediately after, here's where we meet our main cast of Sprig, Polly, and their grandfather Hop Pop, at first being absolutely terrified of her, but over time slowly charming up to her as time passes, eventually making her a certified part of the family, going on all kinds of wacky adventures, all the while trying to find ways to get Anne back home. And when going into the series, I always heard people refer to season 1 as the filler season, because plot-wise there's really not shit going on. But I think season 1 is very special to me as well as important because it does this thing that a lot of Western shows don't get right very often, and it's called character building, giving us more than enough time to sit with and process the main and side characters we will be following through the rest of the series. Like Anne, our main protagonist. Being an only child, we learn so much about her, like how she's a bit needy and very selfish sometimes, prioritizing friendship over all else, and is brutally honest when speaking to and about people 75% of the time. Because yeah, she do be lying sometimes. And even though her social skills in a world filled with talking frogs are kinda mid, leading to her being seen as the oddball out for the first half of the season, that doesn't take away from how fast of a learner she is or how much growth she's willing to display when she very commonly fucks up due to her sometimes selfish and curious tendencies. Like in episode 2 where Anne tried to gaslight Sprig into a deeper relationship by having him go into a dangerous lake to have some fun. The takeaway from this being the label of a true friend, and since they both value friendship heavily, you can probably imagine how serious they take this. But you know the old saying, you're not truly having fun unless you're trying to kill you and your friends in the process. Yeah, no one actually says that. In the end, Anne eventually did apologize, but episodes like these and many more really show us what Anne is about and how her personality and personal ideas about relationships play into the plot later. Which leads me to Sprig, the oldest grandchild of Hop Pop, filled with curiosity and an uncomfortable amount of enthusiasm. Sprig is very much like Anne in a lot of ways, and by a lot of ways I mean they're not alike at all. Throughout each episode, we see Sprig and Anne having several differences in terms of personality, personal interests, creative choices, and more. But the things they do share in common hold them closer than any difference possibly could, bonding over things like human movies, slightly dangerous adventure, and making fun of Hop Pop's cooking, which I 100% support them on because this shit looks straight garbage. Their friendship dynamic is truly special, and I feel like Sprig oftentimes brings out the best in both of them. Which brings us to Polly, the youngest grandchild of Hop Pop, and is the exact opposite to pretty much everyone else in the planter family. And I especially love Polly because she's just a cute little baby gumball of pure unhinged murderous intent. There isn't a day that goes by where Polly doesn't want absolute chaos at all times. And I hate that I say this a lot, but She really just like me for real. Hop Pop is also a favorite of mine because they took two of my favorite things and fused them together into one sentient being. Old people and frogs. The very minute I saw him in episode 1, I fell in love with him and the show completely. Hop Pop is an old kook and is a bit on the weird side. He's a somewhat loyal and honest frog who loves to read, sell vegetables, cherish his family over all else, hide Anne's only ticket to get back home out of fear for his family, and is quite the romantic. Look at that Speedo. I'm sorry. You know, and at first you'd usually think he's just some kind of crude, strict authority figure, but as time passes we get to know the softy side of HP and how he's pretty laid back all things considered. He really do be just one of the bros, you know? And these four all have distinct and individual dynamics that bounce off each other so well. Sprig and Hop Pop's dynamic is one of deeply rooted companionship and a sense of trust. Hop Pop sometimes has a hard time trusting Sprig with certain responsibilities, and Sprig tries his hardest to make Hop Pop proud in most scenarios. And in Hop Pop's relationship being just slightly different because at first these guys absolutely hated each other's guts, arguing very often even, and it wasn't until they got drugged out on frog LSD and a bit of manipulation from Sprig for them to truly realize how similar they actually are. And for Polly? She's just a little baby. Everybody loves Polly. But due to that very fact, Polly is often treated as just the baby and nothing more. Often seen as being incapable of taking care of herself and others, even being left out of certain adventures. Of course, this frustrates Polly, but over the course of a few episodes, Polly proves that she can be helpful while still being a kid who still needs to rely on others sometimes. Anne and Hop Pop's relationship becomes stronger, and Sprig constantly proves to Hop Pop why he's just as responsible as any other frog in town. And all of their personal growth is slowly built up throughout the season, making their relationships even more stronger. And that right there is peak character building. And the thing I love about the first season of Amphibia overall is that they truly understand an important key detail that makes personal growth and connection so important, and that's family. These frogs and Anne just don't feel like family, but by the end of the season, they are family, displaying both the good and the bad sides of what it means to have a familial connection. Sometimes we hate our brothers or sisters for a brief moment because they accidentally piss in our shoe or whatever, or not even agree with them on certain topics, sometimes even going a bit far and calling them names or upsetting them. But despite all of that, at the end of the day, they still love each other. They want to see each other thrive and build off of themselves together, even if it means going against the law itself just to gain some respect. Family truly triumphs all obstacles. And it's not just the planners, but a lot of the side characters within the little town they call Wartwood feel strangely a part of the family dynamic as well. Characters like Wally, the crazy one-eyed frog that teaches Anne a valuable lesson about friendship and how society perceives you. The little yellow frog Ivy who has a crush on Sprig, Sadie Croaker who teaches Sprig life lessons on how everyone in life is not meant to like you, or even Maddie, a little frog who practices dark magic who teaches the planners not to judge a book by its cover, which is actually a very common theme for characters going into season 2. Or even characters like the mayor who is literally just the worst character ever. This guy sucks. Characters like that not only help and build a realistic relationship, giving the world more depth, but the characters in Wartwood actually function and feel like one big character themselves, if that makes sense. They oftentimes form as a collective, pushing the planners forward in some kind of thematic way, directly or indirectly, making their familial bond all the more stronger. The bits and pieces of plot progression is slowly weeded out throughout season 1, and it feels natural when making the transition from its happy-go-lucky episodic nature to its more serious tone in this season, because in my opinion, it knows how to balance it properly. Oh yeah, and I also like how they just casually showed a child enslavement at the end of episode 2 and didn't bring it up until like halfway throughout the season. But with that being said, that finally brings me to the best episodes of season 1 as well as the best character, Sasha. And I call Sasha the best character not because she's likable, because Lord knows she's annoying as fuck in the last episode of season 1, but because I love the concept of a thematically rich antagonist that pushes the protagonist in ways that are physically and mentally personal to them. And Sasha does, you know, exactly that. The episodes where Sasha are introduced are easily my favorite because it does a lot for the world building as well as initial plot setup. You see, Sasha is a friend of Anne's who also got sucked into the magical music box and transported into this frog world. But instead of running into Hop Pop and co, she was captured for being a never before seen creature and enslaved almost immediately. Kept captive for questioning by one of the central antagonists of the series, Grimes. And at first you'd think it's bad for Sasha being captive for so long, but actually she's just chilling, you know? She's literally just vibing in there. Even making a couple of friends with some of the Toad guards in there, having some of them liking her even more than Grimes himself, which is kinda crazy. But the enslavement doesn't last long because he's put into a situation where he needs Sasha's assistance and passive-aggressive sense of leadership skills to free themselves from a natural predator, eventually making Sasha head in command of his army. money. And with her newfound Kim Jong-un status, she thinks it'll be a great idea to use that to her advantage, finally finding her friends Anne and Marcy so they can go back home. Anne being the first option, of course, because she's the protagonist. Sasha invites her, the planters, and the rest of the town back to the Toad's Palace as a celebration for them reuniting after all of this time. But it turns out that it was a trap just to lure them into frog slavery and to kill Hop Pop for unintentionally causing a rebellion amongst the townsfolk against the Toads. Anne, of course, doesn't vibe with that and fights Sasha to save her newfound frog family. The fight is brief and intense, and with the background aid of Best Boy Wally, who plants some magical mushroom bombs under the tower, the building collapses, causing Sasha to damn near fall to her death. But despite everything she put Anne through, Anne grabs onto her hand anyways, saving her in the process. Sasha eventually realizing how much of a bad friend she's been to Anne for all of those years, willing to sacrifice herself because she felt as if Anne would be better off without her, showcasing how your true colors will really show within the face of death. In addition, with Lean On Me by Bill Withers playing in the background, perfectly matching up with Sasha and Anne's relationship, not only for this singular episode, but for their dynamic throughout the rest of the series. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys when I say this shit had me sad as fuck. But of course this means Sasha loses the Toad battle to Anne, but at the price of a grave disconnect between their friendship and lessening their chances of getting back home. And what I like the most about these episodes is that they recontextualize a lot about Anne's character, showing why she values friendship and trust to the extent that she does. In the first half of the episode, we're shown a flashback of Anne in the human world on her birthday with Sasha, Anne being the kid who always seems to be the butt of the joke in a friend group, and Sasha being the one who sticks up for her. But in sticking up for her, it shows how manipulative and self-centered Sasha can actually be, having Anne skip school, do graffiti, and even miss her family planned birthday party just to earn some quote-unquote cool points with her friends. And because Anne really doesn't have many, she values the friends she did manage to make over all else, being hesitant to speak up to Sasha when it matters the most. But being in Wartwood for as long as she has made Anne grow, showing her that it's okay to stand up to your friends sometimes when something more important arises, directly paralleling Anne's birthday, having her develop from her past mistakes. I mean, that and the fact that Hop Pop was literally going to die if she didn't step in, but yeah. Very thematic scene here. After Anne defeats Sasha and somehow terraforms Grimes' tower in its entirety, Sasha and Grimes mysteriously escape into season 2 while Anne is left empty and heartbroken, with one friend down and even less of an uncertainty that she'll get back home. But even during all of that, all of the chaos, all of the pain, and all of the madness, Polly, Sprig, and Hop Pop are there for Anne no matter what. There to comfort her, telling her that things will be okay no matter what. They promise that they will find her a way back home, because that is exactly what family does. Season 1 overall was a fun little joyride followed by immense and immediate sadness. It's kinda like going to Chuck E. Cheese and playing every game for hours only to check out and realize you don't have enough tickets to buy the big Charizard plush on the top shelf. It's a fun experience filled with genuine love and laughs, but it kinda just, leaves you wanting more. And that's exactly what we get with Season 2. Season 2 is where shit really hits the fan, not only for the characters, but in terms of overall narrative plot and my mental state, because after that season finale, I became significantly more sadder. First and foremost, before fully diving into the season, I want to respect the fact on how good this show manages to foreshadow things. There's tiny bits and details in Season 1 and 2 that show up for literally less than a few seconds, but comes back to play a very substantial role later. A show that can pull off some good foreshadowing is always a pretty good show in my book. Season 2 directly follows up the events of Season 1, and as a result, we see the crushing weight that event holds on Anne's mental state. She's pretty optimistic about it overall, trying to distract herself with chores or other adventures to keep her mind off it, but you can tell that it's truly eating her up on the inside. The new objective going into this season is to simply get Anne back home. That is the end goal, and the whole season follows suit on that. Having Hop Pop suggest Anne go to the heart of Amphibia, to a town called Newport. Newport? What? Why did I say that? Having Hop Pop suggest Anne go to the heart of Amphibia, to a town called Utopia, that is the most likely where she'll get answers in regards to the magic box that brought her here and then some. Anne asking why they can't bring the magic box with them because, that would make the most sense, but here's where we see the guilt of HP's actions in hiding the box from Anne slowly catching up to him, and this whole ordeal will play a very grand role for Hop Pop's character, conflicting with his sense of loyalty in the future, but more on that later. So they eventually go on a road trip arc, and the entire season is essentially just them hopping from town to town, encountering new people, new sights, new adventures, and even old friends along the way. And you'd probably think it's just a fun little road trip, but everything that possibly could go wrong on this trip absolutely does go wrong all the time. So yeah, that kind of sucks. Their first stop on the road is kind of a detour because due to Hop Pop having like 7 billion rules they need to follow while on the trip, it kind of restricts the kids' freedom a bit, forcing them to be a bit rebellious, wanting to go out and sightsee and have fun. And then Sprig hop out of the wagon at the worst possible moment at the worst possible location, finding an ancient abandoned fort in the road filled with a lot of dangerous technology and foreshadowing. They literally almost get killed trying to escape, but fortunately they make it out with their lives, but accidentally activate something on the inside, causing a frog robot to be summoned and follow them all the way into episode 27. He'll be more important later. In addition to all that foreshadowing, and opposed to season 1, season 2 leans heavier into character development. Sprig, Polly, and Hop Pop, Maddie, Wally, Sasha, Grimes, and even Mayor Toadstool himself get some form of growth or development that pushes their characters forward in ways that not only benefit them and the people around them, but the narrative as well. And all of that wouldn't be possible if it weren't for the ample amount of character building done in the season prior. And midway through the Planters' journey, we get another solo episode for Big Daddy Grimes and Sasha. And I love these little solo isolated episodes where it shows us the growth of these two alongside the Planters. In the episode Toadcatcher, it directly follows up the events of season 1 for Sasha and Grimes. And you could probably say they're out here not living their best lives, to say the least. They're wandering the woods scavenging, Grimes fell off hard, is in a massive state of depression and even grew a beard, but it seems that Sasha is the only one left with an ounce of perseverance left inside of her. This whole episode is about Sasha and Grimes' relationship and how they formed a mutual bond of respect and personal loyalty. Not only does it show that Grimes was willing to give up fighting because he lost everything, his tower, his post, his pride, his army, his reputation, all went to shit once Anne and the people of Wartwood brought him down, but it also shows the confliction within Sasha and why she was so upset after the battle with Anne, trading day in and day out to keep her mind off the real reason why she was angry. Because just like Anne, Sasha too values friendship. Even though her perception of friendship is a bit rooted in taking power and manipulation, she still feels broken by the fact that after the events with Anne standing up to her, their friendship could potentially be lost forever. And it hurts her the most because it's nobody's fault but hers. But when a Newtopian warrior named Yunnan is sent after Grimes for being a newly found fugitive, Sasha stands up for Grimes when she could have most easily have left him, telling him that she doesn't want to lose another friendship because of her actions. They eventually inspire each other into storming the capital of Amphibia and taking back their positions by force. This whole episode was chef's kiss, because it's scenes like this that really make me appreciate Sasha and Grimes' characters. I'm a big sucker for when shows give us the villain's perspective, and while not outright redeeming them just yet, you can still feel a genuine connection with these characters given their likability and charisma with one another. Speaking of likability though, let's take a big 360 turn and talk. Sprig and Polly are sorta in the back burner of season 2 in terms of overall importance, but this doesn't stop either of them from having great character moments and respective development for each of them. Due to being the baby of the family, Polly feels left out in most situations. Sprig and Polly have a bit of relationship issues along the way, annoying Hop Pop and Anne in the wagon half to death, forcing them to take a different path on the road until they meet up again, which in my opinion seems a bit irresponsible and out of character on Hop Pop's part because, you know, he's the parental figure, but they ended up working things out in the end, so I guess it's okay. Later on in the season, Polly even makes a friend with the likes of a robot that was following them halfway throughout the season, which Polly eventually calls Frobo. Frobo is cute and Frobo is cool, and that's kind of all you really need to know about him because he doesn't really do much until the end of the season, so yeah. And even later on in the season, once they're in the city of Newtopia, Sprig struggles with his education or lack of one because he wants to follow suit with Hop Pop's dream of becoming a big-time scholar, only for him to fumble and get kicked out almost a day after. And I love this moment so much because not only does it advance Sprig and Hop Pop's relationship, forcing them to have a better understanding of each other's wants and needs, but it sends a nice message about the education system and how college isn't exactly for everyone. You don't have to go to a big university or a big school to be important or of value. You get to determine your own sense of self-worth and what you want to contribute to society. Speaking of society in Newtopia though, let's get back to that because midway through all my extensive talking, the Planners and Anne have finally reached Newtopia! Yay! Let's go! And at the gates of the city, they immediately run into the actual best girl of the series, motherfucking Marcy Woo, and second friend who is also stranded in Amphibia. And upon meeting her, Anne is brought to tears. They hug, they cry, they geek out over each other and how much they haven't changed, all the while Anne introduces the Planners to Marcy. And here is where we see all of the intricate bits and pieces of Marcy's character and personality that will come back to haunt her later. I am still not ready to talk about that scene yet, guys. I'm still very distraught after that finale. Marcy is a bubbly, outgoing gal who likes books, puzzles, math, games, and the political economic state of the world right now, and also being an absolute klutz. She actually reminds me a lot of Luz from the Owl House, but if Luz was like Asian and had like an insane amount of bad luck. Upon arriving in Utopia, using her nerdish intellect, Marcy somehow manages to become the chief guard of Utopia, so she has all of the ins and outs of what life is like in the big city, as well as having close connections to the king himself, Andrias, who is 100% not suspiciously evil whatsoever. And after a long day of fighting ants on steroids to free up some space for them to open up the gates to the city, Marcy and Anne then make up, discussing how she met Sasha prior, and how much their relationship with Sasha and one another has changed since coming into Amphibia. They now have the freedom to make their own decisions, and promise to find Sasha a way back home and to live happily ever after. Surely nothing bad can possibly happen beyond this point. So they arrive in Utopia and meet King Andrias for the first time. He greets them, gives them an infinite money hack to spend on their stay in the palace due to being friends with Marcy, and later does some extensive research to find out in order to get them back home, he needs the music box with 3 magical stones that need to be charged at 3 different temples. They obviously don't have it on them right now because Hop Pop, being a silly goose, buried it in the planter's family yard, so they go back to get it. But during the process of all that, I like how they don't make getting the music box a simple one and done thing to rush the plot forward, but they make it an extensive character drama, having Anne and the planner struggle with letting go, not being ready for Anne to leave. Because they grew so close with her in such little time, they break down at the thought of her not being a part of their lives anymore, even going on a whole stress-free day to take their minds off the crippling sadness. But turns out it wasn't stress-free at all, because wherever they went, they conveniently had something that reminded them of their past adventures, and eventually winds up going back with them to Wardwood, which would then become some of my favorite episodes of season 2, being After the Rain and The First Temple. These episodes tackle Anne and Hop Pop's relationship perfectly. You see, as I stated before, Hop Pop has been lying to Anne about hiding the music box, and after finding the box missing, Anne, being the curious kid she is, overhears that Hop Pop lost it. And this sequence of events was the start of one of the best scenes in the entire show. After finding out that Hop Pop has been lying, Anne is justifiably upset because in doing so, it jeopardizes Anne's only way back home, feeling like she's even more of an outcast now than when she first arrived, making her feel like she's not a part of the planter family. Throughout the entire episode, we see Hop Pop struggle to make it up to Anne in such short time, feeling the looming guilt and weight consume him. And after finally finding the music box, Hop Pop tells Anne the truth about why he hid the box. It was simply to protect Sprig and Polly. After their parents were killed by herons, he swore to protect the family no matter what the cause. And then he breaks down into tears. He feels pathetic, disgusting, and untrustworthy. And when he apologizes, you can truly feel the deep pain and regret in his voice. This scene is so powerful. And being the kind at heart person she is, Anne quickly forgives him and understands. And even though she says he's forgiven, the drama between them doesn't stop there and actually carries on into the next episode. In the next episode, the planners, Anne and Marcy all go to the first temple. And within that temple, it's filled with puzzles, mind games, and traps, all to test the intellect of whoever comes inside. Which is perfect for Marcy because she's a fucking nerd. But throughout all of that, we constantly see the passive-aggressive tension between Anne and Hop Pop trying to help and get along with one another after the events of last episode. And at the end of this episode, we have a very psychologically important scene for Hop Pop and Anne. After entering into a Harry Potter-styled chess deathmatch, and during the process, we're then shown that Anne is still clearly upset about Hop Pop lying to her. Hop Pop fails to understand that and simply wants Anne to let it go. He wants to move on from the pain he caused her, but Anne lets him know that she simply doesn't know what it'll take for her to move on, and she just needs time. The realism in this scene is absolutely amazing. You can't just force someone to move on once you've hurt or wronged them, and even though someone can accept your apology, emotions and feelings are complex. Some people simply can't just get over things, and even though you do apologize, no one is completely obligated to accept that apology. It's little moments and character arcs like this that make Amphibia so much worth the watch. But anyways, outside of Hop Pop's and Anne's issues, I like the theme of each gemstone and temple representing a different virtue of each of the 3 girls' main character traits, and plays into their character arcs as well as their solutions for charging the stones of their respective temples. Green represents intellect, wit, and being a nerd, and the first temple reflects that perfectly through Marcy. Her whole stick is being the smarty pants of the group, and that aspect of her character is challenged constantly throughout the first temple. Blue represents heart, compassion, and benevolence, and the second temple displays that through Anne perfectly. Putting Anne to the test, this temple brings up all of her past mistakes and issues to the forefront, questioning her very ideology on where she stands. But despite all of her fuck-ups, Anne isn't afraid to own up to her mistakes and is willing to risk her life for others, showcasing that she will do the right thing no matter how much she does or doesn't deserve it, perfectly intertwining with her character and how often we see her doing the right thing, making connections through acts of compassion. And lastly, the red gem represents strength, power, and brawn, of course being directly tied to Sasha. The later half of the second season mainly focuses on her, Marcy, and Anne's relationship. Following up the events of the last Sasha and Grimes' wacky adventure, Grimes and Sasha, along with their 2 side pieces, Braddock and Percy, go to the Toad Council to convince all other their toad towers and assisting them on overthrowing King Andrias and ruling the kingdom. They say no, of course, but under one condition. They get a magical toad Thor type hammer that'll truly deem them worthy of being formidable leaders. They of course get it, but not without great struggle, and these next handful of episodes really showcase the strength and persistence of Sasha, whether it be by not giving up and literally risking the lives of her newfound friends and teammates, defeating a fire golem in the third temple only to proceed to backstab Marcy and Anne, using them as pawns just to get to Utopia, or getting jealous of the planners when they invite them over after calling a fake truce in the prior episode for not having control over a silly charades game. Sasha's sense of power and strength is constantly on display, and while that power is most definitely useful, it does showcase how power can corrupt and form greed when left unattended for so long. But despite how power hungry Sasha is, you can tell in a very weird way she still cares about her friends' wants and needs. But yeah, fuck all that, because that's immediately undermined in True Colors is the final episode of season 2 and probably the best episode of the entire series. This was the episode I've gotten spoiled on, and looking back on it now, it was probably a sign from a higher being telling me to go watch this show, because the hype for this episode was 100% justified. The episode starts with Anne, the planners, Sasha, Marcy, and Grimes all going to Utopia to give King Andrias the music box so they can get back home. But in a heavily built up sequence of events, at the very last moment, Sasha and Grimes steal the box from Andrias, imprisoning him and everyone else shortly after. Anne, feeling betrayed yet again, denounces her friendship with Sasha and realizes that sometimes no matter what you do, sometimes people just won't accept change. However though, that doesn't stop Sasha from still feeling conflicted about her actions. She's clearly a bit insane, because no normal teenager would do what she just did, but even though she's just a little crazy, she's still human deep inside. She got all the power she longed for, but when asked by Grimes to continue on, she doesn't know how to feel anymore. She's indecisive and doesn't know what she wants, because she's dissatisfied and unfulfilled. With Anne calling her a horrible person, those were words that would stick with her forever. However, during her time of deep thought, Sasha and Grimes accidentally find out that King Andrias isn't exactly what he seems, so then taking over the kingdom is actually sorta a good thing? All the while that was happening, Anne and the others escaped imprisonment surprisingly easy and freed King Andrias as well in the process. But little did they know that
you two fuckers just made the biggest mistake of your lousy career.
They give Andrias the music box, and literally seconds after, he reveals that his ancestors weren't actually peaceful dimension travelers, but actually conquerors of entire world. This has been built up a lot through the series, and the payoff is very satisfying because the show really makes you despise Andrias in such a short amount of time. Andrias then summons his ancestors' robots from the ancient ruin in the road that we've seen all the way back in episode 1, and pulls a Avengers Age of Ultron moment out of nowhere, making the castle float, and everything goes downhill from here. And the saddest thing about this episode to me is not the Sasha betrayal, or the fact that Polly grew legs and looks kinda weird now, but the parts where Marcy is pouring her heart out to her friends, because she was the one that found the music box. Her parents were going to move, and that scared her. She wasn't ready to let go of the friends and connections she made, so she crafted an escape from her life, an escape from all of her worries and her troubles, an escape from, you know, change. As a common theme within this show, Marcy of all people is the one who couldn't accept change. She believes she gave Anne and Sasha everything for the better. She gave them a new life, a new purpose, new friends, even helping their friendship grow within the process. And even though on a very hyper-technical sense she's right, morally speaking, Marcy is in the wrong here. Whether it was intentional or not, Marcy puppeteered this entire situation. Her clumsiness and her trustworthiness was a weakness that she didn't see as an issue. She didn't want to accept that change, so in doing so, that was her biggest downfall. So in attempts to stop Andrias from taking over the world, they try to fight him, but it's no use because Andrias kills the goat Frobo, used Sprig as a hostage, and drops him out of the window to break Anne's character, showing her that no matter what she does, it won't amount to nothing, telling her that friendship will lead to nothing but pain and suffering, because in his mind, friendship is a crutch to distraction. And then we're shown a beautiful montage of Anne and Sprig's moments together, all of the times they fell asleep together, all of the times he showed her support, genuine love and compassion, and all of the times he made her feel genuine joy. Anne cried not only because she was going to lose one of her only genuine friends she had, but because Sprig, out of literally anybody else, was her family. But then Anne goes fucking Super Saiyan. This is exactly what I have been waiting for. Anne then beats the shit out of Andrias, destroying all of the robots inside in a beautifully animated moment before passing out from pure unparalleled rage. I genuinely felt so emotional here because I thought Sprig was really going to die, but it turns out Marcy used her big ass bird to save him. Sasha then fends off Andrias and they take the magic box and open a portal so they can finally get back home. And they all live happily ever after. Hooray! Yeah, that actually doesn't happen. Because immediately upon opening the portal, Marcy literally gets backstabbed by Andrias, and her final words were, "I'm sorry for everything." The portal closes, leading Anne and the planners back to the human world as the episode ends, finally putting a close to season 2. Oh, fuck. Season 2 of Amphibia is without a doubt the best season of the show. Everything from the character, the development, the comedy, the animation, everything was at its peak in this season, and there wasn't a single moment in time where I felt a doubt with its presentation. Although there was a few moments where I felt a couple of conflicts were solved a little quickly, but literally everything else in the season makes up for that. This season was like a never-ending roller coaster that keeps going up, and when you finally beg them to stop the ride, they say fuck you and keep going up anyways. I enjoyed every second of that, and I'm more than excited to finally dive into season 3. Season 2 was all about change and eventual growth. Season 3 is all about acceptance and learning how to live with that change. And considering that's one of the biggest themes throughout the entirety of the show, Season 3 as a standalone really drives into that the most. Not only does this season beat you in the head with its themes, it also tackles a lot, if not most, of the series' politics and world building. Like later on in the season, we casually have amphibian racism, which is... which is actually pretty hilarious now that I'm saying it out loud. Since so much happens this season and there's so much I want to talk about, unlike the previous 2 seasons, I won't be briefly recapping in chronological order, but instead I'll be talking about each main or important character this season and how they connect with the overall themes, narrative, and overall characters of this season and the series as a whole. With Season 3A being about Anne and the Planners settling back into Earth while trying to get back to Amphibia to stop Andrias and the Core while meeting new friends in the process. And Season 3B being about them finally getting back and starting a rebellion to officially take down Andrias and his army. Season 3A starts off with Anne and the Planners landing back in Anne's home city, meeting her parents in a much needed reunion, and it's genuinely nice to see that Anne has both of her parents. Because a lot of times in shows like these, either both or one of the parents are usually, dead. It's kinda a cliche trope at this point, and it's usually used as some form of motivation for the protagonist. But Amphibia doesn't really do that, so it's kinda refreshing to see that not only both of her parents are actually alive, but very supportive of their daughter as well. To be honest, a lot of 3A is just fun time shenanigans, fish out of water scenarios for the planners getting used to Earth, but in that short amount of time, a lot happens. Like, Andrias sends a robot to Earth to literally kill Anne, Sasha and Grimes go to Wardwood and start a rebellion, Anne and the planners find an ancient pot thingy at a museum for clues on how to get Anne back to Amphibia, a mural curator named Dr. Jan to help them along the way. Andrias sends more robots and the Boonchuys family fucking murders almost all of them. Polly meets new friends and fixes robots so he's actually not dead. Yay. Some foreshadowing happens. Anne can kinda control her Super Saiyan powers now. A gay bald dude named Mr. X, who is now my favorite character and is working for the FBI, finds out that weird humanoid toads are on Earth and hunts the planners. Sprig's birthday happens. He also becomes a superhero for a while. Marcy isn't dead either and actually becomes the physical manifestation of Ermac from Mortal Kombat. The planners meet a girl with blue hair who's a scientist who wants to help them get back to Amphibia. Christmas happens. Andrias literally becomes Santa Claus, and at long last they finally open up the portal to Amphibia after a long season of hijinks, meeting new friends and a crazy amount of plot armor. I'm most definitely going to go more into detail about all of that and the characters in a second, but man, that was a lot. Mr. and Mrs. Boonchuys, just like the citizens of Wardwood, kind of function as a singular character themselves, although their personalities are very different, with Anne's dad being a video game and pop culture nerd, and her mom being the down-to-earth, slightly more authoritative figure. Being Anne's parents, you could imagine their dynamic with her are very similar and important. When Anne brings the planners back home, they are more than excited to finally see their daughter after 4 long months. But with the addition of the planners, they are kinda iffy about just having them in their home. But they eventually come around and warm up to them out of the kindness of their hearts. Anne doesn't tell them the truth about a giant newt having a bounty on their heads, but despite that, the Boonchuys are very charitable people. Not only are they charitable, but they are heavily cultural as well. Their Taiwanese heritage plays a very big role in the way they value family so much in the way they do, and why they're so hospitable. The Boonchuys are the kind of people that will give you their last dollar, even though they know they need it more. They are grateful to the planners for looking out for their daughter after all of these months, feeling as if they don't owe them anything, and are even more surprised on how Anne has changed from a severely irresponsible wildcard to a more straightforward girl that displays leadership and responsibility. And they're very proud of how much their daughter has matured, to say the least. So much in fact that Mrs. Boonchuy can't even believe it, because when they find out Anne has been lying to them the whole time about what's really going on with Andrias and the robots, Miss Boonchuy fucking snaps. Not because there are robots literally trying to kill her and her family, but because Anne lied to her, which is just a little weird to me because, ma'am? Priorities? But I love this underrated moment for Anne and her mom because it shows despite how supportive they were of Anne, they still had their sets of issues, and almost all of those issues being brought forth because of Anne. She was the one that was laid back and irresponsible, taking her mother and father's support for granted. But within the few weeks she went back home, Anne finally realized the importance of accepting the help that she's given. Yeah, she kinda lied I guess in protecting them, but her lying in the moment for their safety doesn't really negate her growth one bit. The Boonchuys are such great and lovable parents, and in a way they kinda embody the 3 calamity stones and main core themes of the show for Anne. They display wit, intellect, strength, and acceptance all for their daughter's sake, because as a parent you need to balance it all, because that's exactly what good parents do, and they stay that consistently balanced all throughout the season, even running from the law itself and risking their lives to protect the world just to give Anne a sense of closure and happiness. Sprig from the beginning was always a favorite character of mine. He shined the most in season 1, but in season 2 and 3 is where he gets the most development, with him being a part of some of my favorite moments in the entire series. Like in season 2, where him and Anne have a heartfelt talk about loss and grief, with Anne being away from her mother for months and Sprig never really knowing his parents due to their passing. They can really relate to each other here on a personal level, expressing how it feels to be away from someone for so long, with Sprig saying one of the most hardest quotables I've ever heard in my entire life, being, "Can you miss someone you never actually knew?" That's silly. I mean, of course you can't. Never change, Sprig. Never change. Season 3, despite being a little slow in the beginning, has a lot of great moments for Sprig, learning valuable life lessons of self-control and respecting personal boundaries. Sprig being so young is perfect for his character because he is easily susceptible and a bit selfish and curious, usually leading to him making situations worse than they need to be. But despite being a 10-year-old, he has a lot of mental maturity for when it matters the most, especially in season 3. Throughout the entire series, despite having a loving family, Sprig kinda struggles to find a place, always feeling like he needs to prove his self-worth to be of value when it comes to family or just in general, and we see that the most through Sprig trying to force himself into the Boonchuys family dynamic, him becoming a superhero just for a bit of external validation, or when they finally go back to Amphibia and he starts a fight with Grimes' sister just to prove a point of his own strength. Sprig is a character of many feats, and his arc is reflective of that. From season 1, where Hot Pop would literally trust a baby over him, all the way up to the point where he's at the forefront of a war zone, defending his family, his friends, and his world. To say Sprig's progression is anything short of amazing would most definitely be an understatement. Hot Pop's character throughout this series has been all about loyalty, trust, and living up to expectations. Being the oldest planter and an adoptive parental figure to Anne, he's often seen as the point of authority and rule most of the time, always making a plan or taking the initiative when traveling. But an underrated aspect of his character that I love is that Hot Pop feels like such a genuine old man. And by that I mean he often feels like it's a bit too late for him to do things he wishes he could have done or explored more when he was younger. Hot Pop's age kinda gets to him a lot because we often see that he has a lot of hidden talents and hobbies. He loves agriculture, dancing, and acting, but he feels like due to his age, sometimes it's a little too late to expand on his natural skill. That most definitely doesn't stop him, of course, but he can't help to muster the feeling that a lot of the time he doesn't have anyone there for him that share his same likes and interests. We also get a lot of past trauma from Hot Pop and the rest of the planners in season 3B, from when Andrias captured the herons that killed Sprig and Polly's parents to use them in the final battle. This affects Sprig and Polly, but it especially affects HP because he was there to not only witness it, but he feels like if he came sooner, he could have done something nothing to stop it. Hop Pop's arc is one of learning how to overcome obstacles with age, and how no matter what age or how old you get, just like the main core theme of the show, it's never too late to show change, because change is the very thing that makes us stronger. Out of all of the three girls in the Calamity Trio, I feel like Sasha is the most enjoyable, but also the most difficult to talk about, because she displayed a lot of progression and regression over the course of seasons 1 and 2, with season 3 solidifying her growth, but there's also a couple of moments where I'm looking at Sasha like, what the fuck are you talking about? Immediately after Anne and the planners are sent to Earth, Sasha and Grimes take refuge in Wartwood, where they get all acquainted with the residents. And right here is where I think Wally says it best and pretty much lays out Sasha's entire conflict and character arc in a comedic way, being the importance of honesty, being true to yourself, and the importance of friendships. These were all rubbed in Sasha's face because they're all attributes that were taught to the townsfolk by Anne herself, and is the very reason why Sasha and Anne drifted apart in the first place. Sasha is finally feeling the immense guilt of her actions and the burdens she's caused to not only Anne, but the entire world of Amphibia. And the more the people of Wartwood lift up her spirits, portraying her as some quote-unquote saint, the more guilt she feels. And I like how naturally progressive Sasha's redemption is. Yeah, she's a fuck-up who probably doesn't deserve a second chance, but eventually, through her acts of genuine selflessness, does she finally find her ground and position in life. Now knowing that you don't need to be abusive and manipulative to be a leader, because good leadership often comes from a form of natural and mutual respect. And that directly plays into her character later along the line, because when Anne and the planners return, Sasha is a much well-respected and valuable asset not only to the frogs of Wartwood, but to the resistance as a whole, realizing from Anne herself that having faith in the ones around you is just as important, if not more so, than leading. Her respective relationship with Anne, the Wartwood residents, and even Grimes to an extent all helped her to formulate a genuine understanding of what friendship truly is, outside of treating it like a one-sided matriarchy. And as much as I like Sasha's development and character overall, I did find it kinda weird how when Sasha and Anne managed to form an army and coherent plan to take down Andrias the Core, Sasha is all like,
"But Marcy lied to us, that's kinda messed up. I don't know if we can salvage this friendship, and oh no, what?"
And I'm kinda just sitting there like, Sasha, you're literally a war criminal that tried to kill Anne and her friends more than once and underwent an entire arc about how anyone can change and that it's okay to make mistakes. You literally say that yourself in the episode where you meet the Ohms. All Marcy did was lie out of genuine fear. What she did was significantly more tame than literally anything you ever did while in Amphibia. Like, I get the concern, but are you genuinely smoking crack right now? What are you talking about? But outside of that, Sasha is honestly one of my favorite characters in the entire show. Her extensive growth is absolutely immaculate and perfectly shows that sometimes power and strength is a virtue that is best suited with the aid of respect, or in her case, compassion and heart. Marcy Wu is my all-time favorite character in all of Amphibia. And I know I kinda said that about Hop Pop, but once Marcy came on screen, I automatically forgot who HP was, because Marcy, she's just that good. Unlike Anne and Sasha, a lot of Marcy's conflict come from her own inner turmoil, and I think that is a perfect contrast to the other girls within the Calamity Trio, because Marcy sort of works as a connective tissue for them as a whole. Sasha and Anne being so vastly different from one another, Marcy kinda segues their friendship and is the middle ground that keeps things running smoothly on both ends. Ever since Marcy stole the music box, she felt that her friendship was kind of fading, not particularly because of her, but more so in general. And with the addition of her potentially moving because of her parents, Marcy obviously wanted no part of that. Marcy couldn't simply accept the change that came with life, and because of that, consequences shortly followed. So she trapped them in Amphibia to get them to grow, and it kinda stinks a little because in doing so, it actually did manage to make their bond stronger than it's ever been. But not at a price. Since the beginning, Marcy was always seen as the timid and clumsy oaf that just needed some companionship. Marcy is a loose screw and is easily taken advantage of due to her sheer willingness to not only help people, but to be seen and heard by literally anyone. In a flashback, we're shown a very important moment with just Marcy and the girls hanging out. They're having a sleepover watching a 3 hours cut of Lord of the Rings, which is understandably insanely too long, so the girls eventually fall asleep. All except for Marcy, which at first seems pretty innocent because, like, who wouldn't fall asleep at a 3-hour-long movie at 2 a.m? That's kinda insane. But this moment is so reflective of their friendship as a whole. Marcy often feels neglected by the people she deems the closest, and it took her so long to realize that, causing her to grow attachment issues. And that's why she's so open to helping whoever, whenever. That's exactly why she'll bend over backwards for her friends, and that's exactly why she's so easily taken advantage of, because it's all deeply rooted in the friendship she cherished so so much. And this plays into her character later as well when the collective consciousness of all the past rulers of Amphibia, called the Core, take over her body, making Marcy the perfect vessel. Not only is she easily manipulated, but her intellect is also an aspect of her character that is taken advantage of. Inside the Core consciousness, Marcy is shown to have perfect friends. It's just a mere illusion to get her to fully commit to the Core and join the hive mind, but in showing Marcy the perfections of what her friends could have been, makes her realize that in reality, her friends will probably never do that. No human is perfect, and her friends were honestly no exception. They didn't care about her personal interests and they disregarded her feelings, further deviating Marcy from them and psychologically strengthening the Core. Because now, they have a mental advantage over Marcy. And it's so sad because there is no one else to blame but them. Marcy is at fault to an extent as well because she does realize growing up is a part of life, and sometimes reality can hit you hard when you finally realize that you can't force your way into someone's life. You can't force people to care harder than they are, and you can't force a stronger bond with people. That's something that has to come through natural progression. And at that point in their lives, they were all not willing to accept change. And yeah, Marcy kinda screwed up by taking the music box, but this was all a chain reaction stemming all the way back to their issues and struggles as a collective friend group. And the Core works as a perfect catalyst for Marcy's character arc, because similar to Andrias, the Core feeds off rejection and isolating personality in favor for power. And given Marcy's relationship with Anne and Sasha, she would be the perfect example to join the Core. But despite Marcy being clumsy and easily influenced, she stands her ground and rejects a false reality that she could have in favor of salvaging the flawed one that she's been living her entire life. Because finally, right now, at this point in her life, Marcy finally believes in change. As I've said before, the Core is just a culmination of the greatest minds and leaders' souls of Amphibia clumped into one big spider-like Bakugan ball. The Core itself isn't really much of a character, but more so functions as a foil to other characters to get the plot going. And I didn't mention them much in the previous seasons because outside of some foreshadowing here and there, they weren't all that important. But now they're pretty much the central bad guy of the third season along with Andrias, and I gotta say that Andrias as a character is sick. Whoever wrote this guy most definitely needs an award because someone clearly cooked her. The Core functions as the antagonist not only for the girls and the rest of Amphibia, but also for Andrias, because the Core not only features his dad's soul as a part of his consciousness, but also the entirety of his lineage pretty much talking down his neck during 100% of the war. And Andrias is just as much as a victim in this situation as Marcy, and I love that because in doing so, it makes Andrias all the more compelling. The Core isn't the only thing Andrias has to worry about because not only is he fighting his literal demons from the past, but he's also fighting his own personal demons himself. In his teenage years when Andrias was still a prince, he had friends that went by the name of Leaf, a supposed ancestor of the Planner family, and Barrel, a tubby little toad guy. Not only did Andrias love being around his friends, but he also had an insane amount of expectation placed on his head. Being the prince to a lineage of world conquerors and rulers, they made do with their high and lavish living by taking over other worlds and exploiting others for resources. And with the help of the magic box, that would make all of their goals possible. But not only is the box helpful, it can help people foresee prophecies, which is exactly what happens when his friend Leaf picks it up and sees the literal most horrifying thing known to man. Leaf then goes to the father of King Andrias, King Aldridge, about her discoveries, but since what she discovers would hinder his and the Core's plan, he kinda brushes her off, causing Leaf to take the music box anyways and escape with it to another world, which is how it eventually ends up on Earth. And as a result to all of this, Andrias resents his friend in order to make things right with his ancestors for the sake of the world in what he deems to be the right thing. And later on, it's not as straightforward with Andrias' betrayal because ever since Andrias was shown in season 2, we see bits and pieces of his true personality slipping out, and it showcases that he's not purely a cold-hearted, emotionless killer without feelings or sympathy. We see how he loves playing games with Marcy or how he enjoys getting gifts for Christmas. Very little things like that remind him of the friends he's made and how his lack of them has changed him for the worst. We see Andrias doubt, struggle, and have second thoughts when following the orders of the Core because he knows that deep down, all of those years ago, Leaf was right, because he is the direct cause of what she saw on that day. He was the one that would bring down society and cause chaos, and that hurts him. And throughout all of that, he was still trying to convince himself that doing what he was doing would benefit him and his people. His past not only shows a struggle between Andrias and his past self in present day, but it also gives a reason as to why his ideology was so twisted and why he's unable to accept friendship, affirmation, and gaining personal connections with someone as a means of positive progress. The only true friend he really had since Leaf and Burl was Marcy, and when she opened up to him, the same exact events repeated, ending in him stabbing her in the back. And I also love how Andrias is a very open parallel to Anne and her character arc. The biggest theme of Amphibia is that of change, and learning how to grow through accepting the faults of your past. Nothing you could ever do can change the past, but it does require change in the present to truly display advancement. Where we slowly see Anne grow and change throughout the seasons, Andrias is the direct opposite, not only being afraid of the change to come, but being outright dismissive of it entirely. He's constantly going on a downward spiral, and in the final battle between Anne and Andrias, Anne sees right through him and even calls him out on this, saying, "So what? Am I supposed to just give up and stop feeling things like you?" Because yeah, that's exactly what Andrias did. He gave up and stopped trying once he believed that there was no other option. He barely gave it a second thought, and because of that, he's just an empty shell of his former self, and much like Marcy, being puppeteered by a higher power for a worse cause. And when Sprig shows Andrias a letter left by Leaf to him all those years ago, telling Andrias that he shouldn't be afraid of change, assuring him that it's okay to open up and let yourself experience it, he breaks down into tears because deep down, he already knows literally nothing he does from this point on can make up for all of the pain and suffering he's already caused. Eventually, Anne does defeat Andrias in the final war, and in his defeat, all Andrias could do is sit there and ask them to save Marcy, causing Andrias to redeem himself in a slight final act to display his growth after realizing the core's true intention, which I'll talk about a bit more in the conclusion. But overall for me, I really love Andrias as an antagonist, even more than Sasha. He was built up expertly as a reckoning force by the end of season 2, and his road to growth within his redemption feels so natural. Although I do wish we did get a bit more time with him to truly solidify his arc, but hey, what can you do, you know? That's still my GOAT. Anne is nothing short of an amazing character, and seeing her gradual growth through the series brings me absolute joy. In the very beginning, Anne was pretty much a fuck-up, to say the least. She was an immature, curious little oddball that was a liar, disobedient, a thief, and snores loud as fuck apparently. She was all those things and more, but the most important thing that she had was heart. Anne has a real knack for compassion, and we're shown that by how beloved she is by the end of the series. She's seen as a heroic figure that's larger than life, capable of doing almost anything. Anne is most definitely a flawed character, and usually the characters with the most flaws are the ones that are the best because that leaves them up for more stronghold development later down the line. All the way back before she went to Amphibia, Anne was indecisive and always went where the wind took her. A person who always had a hard time saying no and never really knew what the future held. So when the principal asked her to write an essay about what she wants to do with her life, she was absolutely flabbergasted because at that time, she didn't really know. In Anne's eyes, she was just a young kid with a lot of time on her hands, still being attached to her childlike tendencies. But being an Amphibia has not only forced her to grow, but has shown her true sense of self-discovery and what she's willing to do to make change for herself. To her ongoing friendship with Sprig and the Planners, to her relationship with the citizens of Woodwood, to making that friendship song with Sasha and Marcy, to the toads in the other valleys, the newts she met along the way, the sentient mushrooms that almost killed her, the locals she gained the trust of while in Utopia, Anne has not only made a change within her own life, but her purpose seems to be bringing out the change in others. She's pretty much like the CEO of self-betterment. She went from a stinky stranger lost in a new world where she could barely tame a snail, to a brave and righteous warrior capable of standing 10 toes down for her family, to a leading commander of an entire world populating army. And it wasn't through brute force and strength or smarts and intellect, but with her sheer compassion and ability to simply understand others on a fundamental level. Even though Marcy lied to Anne, she did realize how neglectful of her friend's feelings and personal interests she has been over the years. Even though Sasha did try to kill them on more than one occasion, she eventually forgave them anyways and knew that a lot of her ways of manipulation came from wanting to be in control, telling Sasha that it's okay to lead. Of course, along the way, there will be obstacles and difficulty, but you know, that's just a part of life. Anne is one person, and a lot of the times you need help, and she understands the importance of companionship to a T, and outside of compassion, that most definitely is her greatest asset. The prophecy that Ohms foresaw was true. Anne, in the end, was the one to save all of Amphibia with the assistance of the music box gems through harnessing a virtue that she had within inside herself all this time. And when Sasha and Anne eventually save Marcy from the core and return back to Amphibia, the core turns into the moon from Zelda for a bit because they're simply too angry to die and plans to literally destroy the world. And with Anne being an avid user of the calamity powers, she can share the powers with Marcy and Sasha. And outside of this beautifully animated spectacle of a finale that perfectly encapsulates the core themes and all the build-up these characters undergo, in the end, it's simply not enough. So Anne does the unthinkable by absorbing all of the calamity powers in attempts to stop the core, and as a result, sacrificing her life. She succeeds, but I find this scene so beautiful, not because Anne finally stopped the final boss, but because in her final moments, Anne finally realized the person she wants to become. Even at the expense of her own life, she wanted to be the one that brought forth change in others. The series finale of Amphibia is probably one of the most saddest and heart-wrenching things I've seen from an animated series in quite some time. Not only does it tie up almost everything perfectly, but it feels so finite and complete. It's almost kinda depressing how conclusive this ending was. I expected a happy little ending with Sprig and the planners all living happily ever after, but Amphibia says, no, fuck that, I'm not gonna do that, I'm gonna make you feel like shit. After Anne finally sacrifices herself, we're given a huge lore dump in the last episode in which the god of space and time comes to Anne while she's dying and gives her the option to either become a god or have a second chance at life. Anne picks the latter half, of course, because now she's a changed person, and she thinks to herself, there's no need to give all of that away. And I like how Anne gives the deities such a nuanced and mature response to their offer, telling them that, yeah, I'm still a kid with room to grow and potential to keep improving. Respectfully, she has her whole life ahead of her, and maybe one day she wouldn't mind taking up that offer if that situation called for it. But eventually Anne is revived, and everyone Anne has grown close with while in her stay in Amphibia rejoices. And not all good things can last forever because Anne has to go home. And in doing so, this will finally destroy the Calamity Box, meaning the rest of Whatwood, Amphibia, and the planners will never be able to see Anne again. Sasha bawls her eyes out with Grimes, Marcy says her final goodbyes to Olivia, Yunnan, and Andrias, and Anne reminisces with Hop Pop, Polly, and Sprig before giving him a long, much-needed hug before leaving and never seeing each other again. We then go through a 10-year time skip with everyone all grown up. Andrias is shown old and has become a farmer in honor of his old friend Leaf. Polly is a full-blown frog, Sprig has a full head of hair, Hop Pop is still alive, thankfully, and they are shown to have built a memorial statue for Anne as a hero of Whatwood, where we're then shown Sasha and Marcy in their early 20s, all grown up and thriving in life, where it shows that after all these years, despite all that happened, Anne slightly grew apart from Sasha and Marcy as adult life took over. And I really like how this show displays that it's okay for that to happen. Sometimes we do walk into different friend groups, or life causes us to separate, but despite that, that doesn't change the true friendships that we made in the past. Amphibia in such a short amount of time has wiggled its way into a special place in my heart. Despite its flaws of episodic nature altering with its tone at times, and the point where I feel like Andrias should have died earlier in battle or faced a bit more consequences for his actions by the end of the series, other than that, the show as a whole still holds up very strongly. With its writing, its world building, its animation, its comedy, its thematic importance, and how it ties into all the characters so smoothly as silk, Amphibia ends off on a note that I'm more than happy with. As in the final scene, Sasha and Marcy visit Anne, now working in an aquarium as a herpetologist, where she's teaching children about a frog that she named Sprig, then concluding it with one of the best and most thematically rich ending quotes that I've ever heard from a series finale, as she goes up to hug Sasha and Marcy with a beautiful score playing representing all of them and their themes. Anne says, change can be difficult, but it's how we grow. It can be the hardest thing to realize you can't hold on to something forever. Sometimes you have to let it go. But of the things you let go, you'd be surprised what makes its way back to you.